Bodybuilding has always gone through cycles. Every once in a while, an athlete would come along and completely dominate the scene, kicking off a whole new era. Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 70s, Ronnie Coleman in the 2000s, Phil Heath in the following decade. Each of them changed the way the sport was practiced and seen. These eras weren't just about racking up titles. They marked major shifts in what people thought the ideal physique should look like. With every new champion came new goals, new standards, and a flood of athletes trying to copy the blueprint. But just like everything in life, these cycles eventually came to an end. In 2018, when Phil Heath lost to Sean Roden, a major chapter in modern bodybuilding history closed. Phil had won 7 straight Mr. Olympia titles, tying legends like Arnold, and for a while he looked unbeatable. His physique had everything: symmetry, insane muscle density, and that sharp aesthetic midsection until he got dethroned. That moment showed the world that his reign was over and opened the door for new ideas about what the best body in the world should even look like. It also sparked a lot of questions. Where was bodybuilding headed next? What would the future look like? The crazy part is, after that, a lot of fans started looking backward, trying to figure out when exactly the sport started changing so much. Phil's physique was almost like a masterpiece, but at the same time, it felt more and more distant from what most people could even dream of achieving or what looked remotely healthy. A wave of nostalgia hit for an earlier, raw era, something grittier, tougher, and more real. And every time people talked about those good old days, one name kept popping up: Dorian Yates. And that wasn't a coincidence. Dorian represented the most radical shift the sport had ever seen. But here's the real question. Do today's fans even realize just how much he changed the game? Before Dorian, bodybuilding was all about clean lines, tiny waists, and that classic aesthetic. Then he came along, and boom, everything flipped. He kicked off the mass monster era. His 1992 Mr. Olympia win hit like a silent earthquake. Most people didn't realize it at first, but the shockwaves would be felt for decades. With his dense, grainy, dark, and insanely conditioned physique, he set a whole new standard. It wasn't just about looking strong anymore. It was about being brutally strong. And that idea would take over the sport for years. Dorian didn't just win. He redefined what winning even meant. While the guys before him would light up the stage with charisma and flashy posing, Dorian walked up there like a freaking tank. Silent, focused, and carrying a physique that looked almost alien. That was the revolution right there. Less show, more substance. And maybe that's why he left such a deep mark. Who here remembers the first time they saw a picture of Dorian at his peak? Mind-blowing, right? That body looked almost impossible, and yet it became the new gold standard for athletes around the globe. What's wild is, even after all these years, the Dorian effect still echoes through the sport. Every time we see a massive, insanely shredded athlete, you can trace that back to him. And that brings up a pretty heavy question. Was Dorian's impact good for bodybuilding? Or did it push the sport down a path that's way more extreme and way less accessible? It's still a hot debate among fans and experts today. The truth is, if you really want to understand Dorian Yates' impact, you have to jump back in time. You have to see what the scene looked like before he arrived and how he shattered every expectation. In the next chapters, we're going to dive deep into the mindset, the training, the methods, and the philosophy of the man who turned bodybuilding upside down. Dorian Yates didn't just pop out of nowhere. Before he became a legend, he was just a young guy from England who loved lifting weights, grinding away in small, low-key gyms that nobody had really heard of. But even early on, there was something different about him, an obsessive level of dedication and an intensity in training that you just didn't see every day. He wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was chasing results. Over the years, his physique started changing in a way that honestly looked freaky. And in 1992, he finally exploded onto the world stage by winning his first Mr. Olympia title. That year, bodybuilding took a sharp turn. Dorian's win over the favorites left everyone stunned. He showed up with a body so dense, so dry, so insanely detailed, it looked like it was carved out of stone. The word everyone kept using was unbelievable. And the wildest part? He was just getting started. Between 1992 and 1997, he won 6 straight titles, getting bigger and more monstrous each time. While his rivals were scrambling to catch up, Dorian was already ahead, training in silence, only stepping into the spotlight when it was time to dominate. With Dorian, an unofficial new category was born, the mass monsters. Unlike the balanced, classic physiques from the so-called golden era, with their tiny waists and flowing lines, Dorian was pure brutality. Massive shoulders, crazy thick back, muscles as dense as concrete. He wasn't there to look pretty, he was there to win. And he did. The audience, used to more artistic physiques, suddenly had to process something completely different. Some were shocked, some were absolutely hooked. What about you? Do you remember the first time you saw Dorian? What was your reaction? Year after year, he stepped on stage, even bigger, sharper, more jaw-dropping. Even when he was injured, he was still wiping the floor with the competition. That's how far ahead of his time he was. His abs weren't the most aesthetic, and his lines weren't the most classic, but you just couldn't take your eyes off that freakish density and conditioning. It became crystal clear. Bodybuilding had entered a whole new era, and there was no going back. This more aggressive style really split opinions. Some of the old-school fans missed the lighter, more graceful look of guys like Frank Zane or Serge Nibret. Others, though, were blown away by the sheer visual impact Dorian brought. He wasn't just another athlete, he was a turning point. His legacy went way beyond trophies. He inspired entire generations. During his reign, Dorian rarely gave interviews, wasn't flashy, and barely showed up outside of competitions. And that only added to the mystery. Who was this indestructible machine? How did he train? How did he stay so laser-focused and just keep getting better year after year? Those questions started swirling around the bodybuilding world. And little by little, the answers started to surface. Dorian had built his own system, a whole lifestyle that was 100% about performance and results. No vanity, just pure hard work. Dorian's rise wasn't just about winning titles. It marked the arrival of a whole new mindset in the sport. He proved you could dominate without running your mouth, that your work could speak louder than anything else. Have you ever heard of it? And no, we're not talking about music or cardio. We're talking about high-intensity training. This method completely flipped the way a lot of athletes train even today. It was originally created by Arthur Jones and later popularized by Mike Mentzer. But Dorian Yates is the one who really pushed it to the extreme at the highest level. He took HIIT and made it his own. While most bodybuilders at the time were spending endless hours in the gym, Dorian proved that less could actually be more if you dialed the intensity up to insane levels. The HIIT method is all about short but brutally intense workouts, where every set is pushed to absolute failure. Instead of doing 4 or 5 sets per exercise, Dorian would do just 1 or 2, but with so much weight, focus, and effort that the muscle didn't need anything else. Every rep was slow, controlled, and deliberate. The goal was always the same: push to the point where you physically couldn't do one more rep. That's the moment, according to him, when real growth happens. And you, have you ever pushed yourself all the way to true muscle failure? This approach went completely against everything you'd see in the magazines back then. Traditional training was all about volume, tons of sets, endless exercises, and hours spent in the gym. But Dorian proved that what really matters is the quality of execution and pushing the stimulus to the extreme. He documented his workouts, shared his routines, and inspired thousands of athletes to rethink how they trained. The most insane part, he spent just over 45 minutes a day in the gym and still built one of the most jaw-dropping physiques in bodybuilding history. Dorian didn't just follow HIIT, he fine-tuned it. He adapted the technique to fit his body, added variations tweaked his rest times, and basically created his own training philosophy. Everything was logged into notebooks, weights, reps, even how he felt during each session. Nothing was random. That deadly combo of precision and intensity was his greatest weapon. Dorian's success with HIIT caused a huge ripple effect across the bodybuilding world. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, a lot of athletes either fully embraced the method or at least borrowed parts of it. The idea of training to muscle failure became almost a holy grail for serious hypertrophy. Even today, top coaches and athletes reference Dorian's influence. Ronnie Coleman himself, who would later dominate the sport, often mentioned the deep respect he had for Dorian's brutal training style. Of course, HIIT has its critics too. Some argue it's not for everyone, and that it can increase injury risk if done wrong. And honestly, they're not wrong. It's definitely not beginner-friendly. Training to true failure demands insane focus, perfect form, and a strong physical foundation. But one thing's undeniable. Dorian Yates proved that intensity can beat volume if you do it smart. The legacy of HIIT goes way beyond sets and reps. It represents a whole mindset shift. Smarter, more strategic training that focuses less on quantity and way more on quality. At a time when bodybuilding was all about glitz, glam, and staying constantly in the media spotlight, Dorian Yates chose the opposite path. While other athletes spent most of the year doing expos, photo shoots, and interviews, Dorian locked himself away in his sacred space, Temple Gym in Birmingham, England. Far from the cameras, far from the US, he focused on just one thing: being the best. And that decision made him one of a kind, a near mythical figure in the sport. Dorian never showed off his physique during prep. Unlike his competitors, who constantly teased the fans with progress pics and updates, he would just vanish for months. When he finally stepped on stage at the Mr. Olympia, it was a total visual shock. No one knew what he looked like until he walked out under those lights. And when he did, it was absolute domination. That mystery built a legendary aura around him. And it wasn't just a marketing move, it was part of his plan. He believed that hard work was done in silence, that discipline didn't need an audience, that a true champion built greatness away from prying eyes. That's why he earned the nickname the anti-bodybuilder. Not because he hated the sport, but because he did everything the exact opposite of what you'd expect from a bodybuilding superstar. And because of that, or maybe even thanks to that, he dominated. His reserved nature reflected his whole mindset. Dorian treated bodybuilding almost like a personal mission, a ritual. He didn't care about fame. He wasn't chasing applause outside the stage. His entire focus was on performance. The stage was the only place he spoke with his physique. That way of living the sport attracted a lot of fans who truly valued the core of bodybuilding: training, discipline, and consistency. This break from the old ways wasn't just about looks, it was philosophical. During the golden era, athletes were all about charisma, stage presence, and flashing smiles. Dorian came up serious, almost grim, carrying a heavy, no-nonsense energy. He brought a raw, real vibe to the sport. Less show, more substance. And that didn't just change how people viewed physiques. It changed what they expected from a champion's attitude. Of course, not everyone loved the shift. Some missed the sparkle of Arnold's days, the lighthearted vibe of the 70s and 80s. But love him or not, you can't deny it. Dorian was authentic. And authenticity? That hits differently. He proved there's no one right way to be a champion. By breaking the mold, Dorian didn't just dominate his era. He kicked open the doors for a whole new breed of champions. After him, the stage started filling up with even more extreme physiques and a wider range of personalities. Diversity grew, and so did the respect for different approaches to the sport. It was 1992 when Dorian Yates stepped onto the Mr. Olympia stage. The bodybuilding world came to a halt. Packing around 265 pounds, about 120 kilograms, onto an insanely conditioned frame, He unveiled a physique that looked straight out of a sci-fi movie. His muscles had a density nobody had ever seen before. The separation between muscle groups was brutal, and his skin looked shrink-wrapped onto his body. It wasn't just impressive, it was downright intimidating. And at the same time, absolutely mesmerizing. That moment changed everything. For the first time, a bodybuilder brought together extreme size and surgical-level conditioning. Up until then, athletes had mostly been judged on symmetry, proportion, and overall aesthetics. But Dorian introduced a whole new physical language to the stage. The audience, the judges, even his rivals, everyone realized right away. The standard had just shifted. The mass monster era had officially begun, and there was no turning back. The next year, in 1993, Dorian came back looking even crazier. That version of him is still considered one of the greatest physiques of all time. More mass, more muscle depth, and somehow he kept that razor-sharp conditioning. He looked unbeatable. A lot of analysts say 1993 was the absolute peak of his visual impact. A real-life living statue. Brutality perfected, but along with all the admiration, the first wave of real criticism started to roll in. And it didn't come from just anyone. Arnold Schwarzenegger, arguably the biggest icon of the golden era, was one of the first to speak out. He believed the sport was losing its soul, trading away body harmony for sheer mass. For Arnold and a lot of guys from his generation, bodybuilding was supposed to be a balance of art and strength, symmetrical lines, tight waists, perfect proportions, and a kind of theatrical presentation. That was their ideal. So when Dorian showed up with 265 pounds of dense, heavy muscle, the criticism came fast. Is this still bodybuilding? Some people asked. Others, though, saw it differently as the natural evolution of the sport. After all, isn't breaking limits what athletes are supposed to do? This tension between the past and the future basically split the sport into two camps. On one side, you had the purists, the fans of the classic aesthetic who dreamed of bringing back cleaner, more artistic physiques. On the other side, there were the new school fans, hyped up about the sheer monstrous size and the idea that the human body could keep reaching crazier heights. It was like the sport was being pulled between classic and extreme. The controversy heated up even more when talk about substance use started to grow. Arnold even pushed for bodybuilding competitions to have stricter drug testing to protect the athlete's health and to protect the image of the sport. He warned that the road bodybuilding was heading down was dangerous, not just for the athletes' bodies, but for the soul of the sport itself. And honestly, that debate is still alive today. Despite all the criticism, Dorian was always upfront about his journey. He never denied using performance enhancers, but he made it clear that chemistry wasn't what set him apart. It was his work ethic, his discipline, his method, his intensity. His insane physique wasn't just the product of science. It was the result of years of extreme dedication. And that's something nobody can take away from him. The battle between aesthetic and mass will probably rage on forever. But Dorian's personal honesty and work ethic are beyond question. This whole debate also revealed something pretty interesting about the audience. A lot of people started to see bodybuilding not just as a show of beautiful physiques, but as a true spectacle of human transformation and pushing limits. The visual impact of the mass monsters was brutal, shocking, almost unreal. And maybe that's what fascinates us the most. Just how far a human being can push their body with absolute focus. So let me ask you, what impresses you more about a bodybuilder? The aesthetic beauty or the sheer impact of the transformation? The battle between aesthetics and freakiness has never really been settled, and maybe it never will be. Every generation will have its own version of the ideal physique. But what Dorian Yates did was open up a new path, expand the possibilities, and show that there's more than one way to reach the top. Before Dorian Yates, the heart of bodybuilding was crystal clear, the West Coast of the United States. specifically Venice Beach, California, home of the legendary Gold's Gym. That's where the stars trained, where the photographers camped out, and where the sport truly lived and breathed. There was almost a requirement if you wanted to make it big. But Dorian came in and shattered that rule. He proved you didn't need to be in the middle of the spotlight to become the best. While the big names of bodybuilding were training under the California sun, Dorian was grinding away in a dark, cold basement gym in Birmingham, England. Temple Gym wasn't fancy. The floor was rough, the equipment was old, and the vibe was heavy. But it was in that raw, no-frills environment that he built a physique that would change the sport forever. The contrast couldn't have been bigger. Halfway across the world, far from the cameras, a true champion was being forged. And honestly, maybe that isolation was his secret weapon. Training outside the US put Dorian in a completely unique spot. Without the constant distractions of the competitive American scene and the ego-driven culture that came with it, he could focus purely on what mattered: training, eating, resting, and growing. He created his own world, with his own rules, his own schedule, and his own mindset, and it turned him into a one-of-a-kind athlete. Beyond that, his victory carried a huge symbolic weight. For the first time, the Mr. Olympia title went to someone outside the American circuit. It inspired thousands of athletes around the world, especially in Europe, to believe they could get there too. The dream was no longer just for Americans. The Olympia stage had officially become global. Temple Gym became a symbol of that silent revolution. It wasn't just a place to work out. It was a sanctuary of discipline. Dorian showed that you don't need a fancy, state-of-the-art facility to build an insane physique. What you need is intensity, purpose, and consistency. Tons of athletes made pilgrimages to that tiny gym just to experience the energy firsthand. And a lot of them left with a whole new perspective on what really matters when it comes to physical evolution. His story also exposed an uncomfortable truth for the bodybuilding world. Maybe the American model wasn't the only way, or even the best way. Maybe the real secret wasn't about where you trained, but how you trained. Dorian proved you could build a legendary physique even when you're far from the traditional hotspots. And that message still hits home today, especially for athletes who don't have access to the best gyms, but have something even more powerful: grit, focus, and resilience. When we talk about true bodybuilding legends, few names carry as much weight as Dorian Yates. His legacy goes way beyond his 6 Mr. Olympia titles. He didn't just win, he changed how winning looked. His discipline, his brutal training intensity, and his refusal to follow trends turned him into an icon. While others chased fame and followers, Dorian chased personal evolution and truth. And that's exactly why he's unforgettable. Dorian went against the grain every step of the way. He trained in isolation, used his own methods, stayed away from the media and the hype. He didn't care about pleasing the press or building a public image. He only cared about being the absolute best version of himself. His life was built around routine, focus, and sacrifice. He proved you can reach the top without losing your soul. And that example, it's still a guidepost for tons of athletes today. Do you know anyone who trains with that same low-key, intense mindset? The impact Dorian made is still being felt today. The obsession with insane size and conditioning we see on modern stages, it all started with him. Before Dorian, the goal was just to look big. After Dorian, the goal became to look impossible. He shattered the idea that bodybuilding was only about aesthetics and brought the image of a body that radiated strength, endurance, and pure grit. It was the end of one era and the start of a revolution that's still echoing through the sport. Even athletes who followed different styles recognized the importance of what he did. Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, Kai Green, all of them, in some way, were shaped by what Dorian introduced to the world. The bar was raised, expectations skyrocketed, And the stage was never the same after the first time Dorian stepped on it with that unbelievable physique in 1992. The game changed forever. But maybe Dorian's greatest legacy isn't physical, it's mental. He taught the world that real success is built in silence, that you don't have to constantly show off to prove your worth, that the true champion isn't the one who shouts the loudest, it's the one who works the hardest when nobody's watching. And honestly, that mindset inspires even people who aren't into bodybuilding. After all, who hasn't been moved by a story of quiet, relentless perseverance? Can you relate to that kind of journey? Dorian also helped redefine what it means to be an elite athlete. It's not just about genetics, chemistry, or structure. It's about mentality. He was one of the first to show that mental toughness matters just as much as physical strength. Every workout, every meal, every hour of sleep, it was all part of a bigger plan. And that way of living is still seen as the gold standard by anyone who's serious about the sport. It leaves us wondering, will we ever see someone else with that same kind of drive and mindset? Now I want to hear from you. Do you prefer modern bodybuilding with freakishly dense, over-the-top physiques like Dorian's? Or do you miss the golden era with its clean lines and classic proportions? This debate is still alive today, and your opinion matters. Drop a comment below and tell us which style speaks to you and why. Let's get the conversation going. If you made it this far, it's because Dorian's story hit you in some way. So go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Around here, we keep it real, honoring the legends while keeping our eyes on the future. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Dorian's story, there's another video linked right here in the card that you have to check out. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the end. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and fuels us to keep sharing these stories that inspire, teach, and make us reflect. And remember, not every revolution needs noise. Sometimes, the ones that change everything start in complete silence.